This is Gemara and Shekalim Daf Yomi Aleph. Today's shir and all the shirim for the month of Nisan have been sponsored by the Grun family, the Nishmas Chaim Mordechai ben Naftali Tzvi. The learning of the entire Chabura as we go through this bit of a difficult Masech of Yerushalmi should be a tremendous chos ilan nishmasai. Of course, Shekalim many mevega Chaim Mesar on Stephen Rezel Zarbas Kanan to lead to Basin to Chaysar Yisrael Mindol Eliyad their parents ben Shavlei Shalom Baz Namiv Shavik Chaner Voldimini Three Shon the Yiddish Daniel Chan Rezel Milka Chay Basvina Libaruch was Musa. Dineda Bashin Mendel Simchatovia ben Avichai Fesha Simon Figat Ver Michel Zvernas Lehuva Menachem Mendel ben Toba Besai Shar Chali Israel as well as the Solishidach Fatalea Basita Menachem Mendel ben Eli Sheva. We pick it up on the bottom of Yudam Beis, and actually today is about the halfway mark of Shekalim. It's been a bit difficult, but hopefully it's slowly getting easier, and we're halfway there. So we're going to go up a little bit because we sort of came to a bit of a grinding halt yesterday. So we'll pick it up about 12, 13 lines from the bottom. First one on the line is Law Kebinyin. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chizkiya, Tana Rav Yehuda, Gedudiyos, HaKateiris, Chol Karbanis Atzibur. The Kateiris and all the communal Karbanis, Ba'im Mitrumas Alishka, they come from this communal funds. This was the theme that we spoke about yesterday, where they used with all the monies from the Machzah Shekel. Mizbech Hazav, Chol Kli Shares, Ba'im Mimaiser Nesachim. They come from the leftovers of the Nesachim, Mizbech Ha'ela, Va'echel Vaz Lazara is buying Misharei Lishcha. Chutz, except for Lazara is buying Lishka's Bedek HaBayis. Ask the Gemara of Atani Avnei Mizbeach. Ha'echel Vazara is Mailin Bahem. But we learned that there is a din of mi'ilah, but how could there be mi'ilah if you're telling me that we buy these items and we repair all these items with the leftover funds? How could there be mi'ilah? And this is really where we concluded. There's a din of mi'ilah on shirayim. Now asks the Gemara on this teretz Amar Rav Chia, you can't say it's Rameir because Rameir's din is only within the year, and this is after the year of those funds, and therefore it would not even work with the Rameir, and the Gemara leaves it off as a kasha. Says the Gemara, a new Gemara, and this is really where we picked off from yesterday. Omar Rav Chizkiya, Tana Rav Yehuda, about 8 lines from the bottom. First words in line is Rabbi Yehuda. Tana Rav Yehuda Gedudiyos. Hashulchan v'ameneir v'mizbechos v'paroiches ma'akvin es hakarbanis. Divi Rameir. Rameir held that these vessels in the Beis Hamikdash, the Shulchan, Meneira, Mizbeach, Paroiches are all Ma'akiv, the Karbanis. What that means is, different pshat what that means. Either that means that if you don't have all of these Kalim, you cannot do any of the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, or it means each one you cannot do its Avodah without the item itself. We'll go with the first pshat, it's a bit simpler. That's what Rameir says. They disagree. Ein lecha Ma'akiv es HaKarban. The only thing that is Ma'akiv, the Karban, Ella, Hakir v'Akin Bilvad. And in truth, on the side over here, in the Gilyan Hashas, they change it from the Goin to the Karkoiv and the Keren Bilvad, referring to the lattice work around the Mizbeach and the horns of the Mizbeach. So that is what the Chachamim held. Those are the only items that were integral and necessary in order to do the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. And on this, again, we have two opinions. How integrally, of course, every Keli was integral, but can you do the Avodah if all the Kelim were not there? And says the Gemara, they argue, and they held Terei and Imrin, they both say, Kol hein dechsev, noichach ma'akiv, sela and einay ma'akiv. Anytime the Torah uses the word noichach, that means it's an integral keli, and if you don't have that keli in the Beis HaMikdash, then you cannot do the avodah. But if it says sela, like the last Tikkun Charatin on the bottom points out, refers to the shulchan, then it is not ma'akiv, which would basically mean, to give a simple example, at a time that, let's say, the shulchan was tamei, or it wasn't there for whatever its reason, they still could do the avodah. He argues and he says, no, even the word sell is makiv. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, moving along to Daf Yomi of today's Daf. Va'afilu Shima Ma'akiv, and the Torah says Shima, you said in its place, those are Ma'akiv. So we have a whole litany, a whole list of all these Amarayim that held that it's not integral necessarily like the Chachamim said. The Chachamim said the only items that were integral or the lattice work and the horns. But we see all these Amarayim see different definitions. Explains the Gemara on the top line of Yud Aleph Amar Aleph, Amar Rav Chanina, Kan ba'avodah shebifnin, but kan ba'avodah shebechutz. There's no debate at all. When the Chachamim said that it only refers to the horns and the lattice work on the Mizbeach, that's referring to the avodah of the chutz. Whereas when these other Amoraim said these different definitions, that was avodas penim, the inside avodah on the Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rav Chanina, shachatzis gedayla ha'isa b'bnei kahanim gedalim. There was tremendous shachatzis, tremendous gaiva, tremendous haughtiness the kahanim gedalim had. Says the Gemara from where? Says Rav Chanina, sheyoysim mishishim kikar zah, more than 60 kikar of his gold. Hayamaytziin ba, they would waste. Why? Kivsa shal para, the ramp of the para aduma, which we spoke about yesterday in Tavayin of Amid Beis, even though that ramp, which was there, the ramp that took the animal from the Beis Hamikdash to the Har Hazesim, the ramp was still there and there was nothing wrong with it. Yet each Kohen Gadol built a new ramp, wasting 60 talents, wasting whatever that means, of gold. Elos, what would they do? They would say, they would rebuild it. That was the gaiva that each Kohen Gadol had, that he had to have the ramp built during his time in the Beis Hamikdash. On that says the Gemara, no. Heisa Rav Ula Kumi Ramana. Rav Ula said in the name of in front of Ramana, that's not true. You just said. Why? How do I know? Vatani Shimon HaTzadik, which was one of the better Kohanim Gedolim, he shtei paros asalai asa. He made 2 paradumas in his lifetime, and yet. In each paraduma, he did not bring on the same ramp. Is the Chalamim Shimon HaTzadik Shachas Hayah? Is it possible that he had shachas on its own ramp? Meaning, I can understand the Kohen Gadol wants to undo the previous Kohen Gadol's ramp, but Shimon HaTzadik built a ramp. He did one paraduma. Now he has a second paraduma. Why is he rebuilding the ramp? Rather explains the Gemara. Rather explains Rav Ula in front of Rav Mana. Ma'ikedayin al shem ma'ila hi b'para. Rather, it was a ma'ila. It was something good about the paraduma that the kind of Gedolim did. Silsal hi b'para. It was a wonderful ma'ila that they did to show kavod to the paraduma. They built a new ramp each and every time they brought that carbon. And Tani and the Gemara in a similar vein shows the tremendous kedusha and tahira that they ensured by the para aduma. Tani zizanu kasalam ayitzin mikan mikan. There were beams and protrusions that stuck off of this ramp. For what reason? When the Kohanim were bringing up the para aduma, we don't want them looking over the edge and potentially looking down. Why? What would happen if they looked down? They might be then being over a mace, over a kever, and making themselves an animal tummy. So to prevent that, they made these protrusions off the ramp. This is going with the second opinion that it was wonderful ma'ila that they did with the para aduma by rebuilding the ramp, and not that it was necessarily gaiva. Says the Gemara, Rav Akiva Omer, 2 dots, about 12 lines down. Ein mishtakrin. Rav Akiva was discussing in the Mishnah when the Mishnah said that they used the leftover money to buy items and made a sale, and the money then went to the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Akiva disagreed, and Rav Akiva said there's no aniyas b'makam ashiras. Ashiras makam aniyas. The Beis Hamikdash is not a person that needs to make money; it's God's house. Says Rav Akiva, we're not profiting for the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, Ella, Imrata yehefsid shalai v'schar lehektish. If you want mutter, you're allowed to. What they were allowed to do is make a stipulation. Meaning the Gemara here is going with understanding that the issue is not necessarily to make a profit for the Beis Hamikdash, but the issue is that the potential loss to the Beis Hamikdash. So says the Gemara, sorry, what would they do? If you want to make a stipulation that if there's a loss, I'll include the loss, and if there's a profit, the profit goes to the Beis Hamikdash, that you're allowed to do. And the Gemara shows a precedent for this, Kadabar Zmina, Itpekid Gabe Midali Diasmin, that this person had the pikadon, the deposit of Yisayim Bayin, also Vishal Ramana, and he came to ask Ramana, Amar Lei, and Ramana told him, Ein Ba'is Deyav Sada Didach, Va'agra Ditar Vaichon Shari. If you want, you're allowed to make the same stipulation that the hafsada, the loss, will be yours, and the profit will go to the assignment. Then you're allowed. Meaning, if you make it basically bulletproof that the assignment, the Beis Hamikdash, will lose, then it is permissible. And similarly, Rav Chia Barada Itzvakid, he had a deposit kabei midal diasmim. He had a deposit from the possession of Yisayim Vavikain, and he did similarly, making this stipulation that if there's a loss, he includes the loss, and if there's a gain, then the Yisayim get it. And that is how the Gemara is explaining this din of Rav Akiva, that not necessarily is there a problem making the Beis Hamikdash gain, but it's the problem for the potential loss. We said in the Mishnah, Meiser Peirais, we spoke about the excess of the fruit, and when we read the Mishnah, we said we're going to discuss in the Gemara exactly what this means. So now the Gemara explains that Masnisan to Rabbi Yishmaeli, the Mishnah is going with that part of the Mishnah is going with Rabbi Yishmael and not Rabbi Akiva. Meaning the Gemara's understanding that Meiser Peiros means the excess of the Peiros, that if they were to sell the fruits and other items that they bought with the Machzah Shekel, the money would go to the Beis HaMikdash. So says this Gemara, this is clearly not going with the opinion that we just said a moment ago of Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva says we don't make money, we don't lose things for the Beis HaMikdash. Rather, it's going with Rabbi Yishmael. As the Gemara shows, Rav Chia bar Yosef Pater Matanisa, he explains the Mishnah, Meiser Peiros, Schar LeHektish. The benefit goes to the Hektish, Meiser Nesachim, Zu Sa Revius. And the excess of the Nesachim, that is the Sa Revius. What's that referring to? That's referring to they would make special arrangements with the vendors when the Beis HaMikdash would buy all the items they needed, the oils, the flour for the menachos, the wines, etc. They would make a stipulation. They would tell the vendor, if the price goes down, if the price goes up, we pay what we stipulate right now. And if the price goes down, then you have to give us, the Beis HaMikdash gets extra product. So basically the Beis HaMikdash will gain on both ends, and that's called the Sa Revius, the fourth Sa, meaning an additional Sa that the Beis HaMikdash is going to get in the event that the price goes down. Rav Yechon Pater Masnita, he explains Meiser Peiros Zu Sa Revius. So that's referring to this additional Sa that they might get if the price changes, and Meiser Nesachim is Lebeirutzin. That's referring to the heaping. What's the heaping? That when they would donate to the Beis HaMikdash, they bring a cup of wine, a cup of water, there would always be, or let's say a cup of flour, we'll see in a moment if there's a difference in liquids and solids, but there would always be, they would heap it, they would make it go over the top a little bit, that surface tension that holds it in. So that excess, what would they do with that excess? Because that wasn't part of the carbon. So that excess, that's what we're referring to as the meiser, that's what they would use it for. As the Gemara of Leslie Rav Chia bar Yosef Lebeirutzin, he doesn't hold to this concept. He didn't list this. Well, what did he do with that? Rav Chizkiya Madin Nafal Lisa Ravias Nafal Lebeirutzin. No, he held it's the same thing. And now the Gemara explains that this din of Beirutzin, this din that when you donate, if there's a heaping amount, Al Daite de Rav Chia bar Yosef, like we just said, Nicha, everything is good. That the end of the Mishnah says in Mishtakr Mishala Aktish, because then it makes a lot of sense. The Rav Chia bar Yosef explained that it has to do with Beirutzin, how to do with the heaping, and it does not necessarily have anything to do with the Beis HaMikdash gaining, because he's going with Rabbi Akiva that we don't let the Beis HaMikdash to gain. That's what the end of the Mishnah said, that they don't agree by Peiros, meaning because the machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva is going to be the machlokes in the end of the Mishnah whether the excess will go to the Beis HaMikdash. Are we concerned the Beis HaMikdash will lose or not? But says the Gemara, I'll die to the Rav Yechon Kasha. But according to Rav Yechon, it comes out shver. Because Rav Yechon explained that the Meiser Peiros is, and the Meiser Nesachim does go to the Beis HaMikdash. So what's going on? What does it mean at the end of the Mishnah when it said that they don't agree to this din of Peiros? V'ataninan amdu mikimel yaspek midalid. V'taninan zevezel lo yamaydim bepeiros. Lo yamaydim bepeiros bekitz lemizbeach, explains the Gemara. Aval maydim ayu bekli shareis. What does the Mishnah mean when it says they don't agree? They don't agree that the excess goes for the kayitz of the mizbeach, the dessert, the excessive, the extra karbanos when the Beis HaMikdash is idle. But of course they agree to the concept, and that they're going to they're going to disagree, and they're going to hold that you use the money for the kli shareis to buy the vessels for the Beis HaMikdash. And now we conclude this Mishnah, says the Gemara, Kedain Beirutzi Tzibor Afilu Beirutzi Yachid. This din of Beirutzi, this din of the heaping, is not only by when there was a donation for the general populace, but rather also for a singular person. Says the Gemara, how could that be? You just told me that when a donation comes to the Beis HaMikdash and it's heaping, that excess heaping, what do you use? You use for the klisharis. But I asked the Gemara, if a singular person brings a donation, that donation cannot be used to buy the klisharis, the different vessels in the Beis HaMikdash. Explains the Gemara, not a problem. Bringing us back to yesterday's daf. The mother Kohen Gadol can make a shur for her son. Why? She gives it over wholeheartedly. So too over here we're going to say it's not a problem if it comes from a private donation. As long as you do it willingly, then it can even go for communal services like the klisharis. And now we conclude Akadain Beirutz Allah lach, afilu beirutze yavesh. You're telling me it's a din only by lach or even by yavesh. What's the difference? The difference is when you would bring something to the Beis Hamikdash, should be inside a cup. That cup would be in klishares. The interior of the cup is kaddish. So now, if it's a liquid and there's a surface tension, it makes a lot of sense. Why? Because as you pour it in, liquids move around. So as liquids move around, every part of the liquid is going to be touching every dot of inside the cup, and therefore the entire liquid is going to have a din of kedusha on it. Therefore, it makes a lot of sense that the excess part of the heap will be used for the klisharis of the Beis Hamikdash. But if it's a solid, solids don't move around in a cup. So that which is inside the cup, I understand that is a din of kedusha. But that which is heaping on top, why does that have any din of kedusha at all? So that explains the Gemara. Like we learned, Taman and Nesachim. Shakachu bekli v'nimsa zevach pasol im yishmei zevach acher yikravu yimai v'imlav lanu yivslu belina will yes be pasol, proving the fact that there will indeed be a difference, that this whole din that we spoke about, the beirutzi of the heaping, is indeed only a din by liquids, because by solids it's not going to get the same kedusha. Says the Mishnah, the third halacha, third Mishnah on this parak, Moisar Ketairis, continuing the theme like we just spoke about, we've been speaking about since yesterday. What do we do with the excess? So let's say you have excess Ketairis. Why would you have excess Ketairis? So to take a moment over here in the Tikkun Chadatin, it explains a bit of a math. We're not going to get too lost in the math, but basically it explains that when they made the ketairas, how many portions they made the ketairas once a year. Here it is, Meiser ketairas, and the B'tiklin Chatan explains that every year what they would make is they would make 368 portions mana of ketairas, and there are 365 days of the year, and therefore we would have an excess 3. There's really 354 days of the year, and then they would use 3 mana for the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. But basically what happens is that every year they will be left with, because as he points out, it's only 354 days, so every year they'd be left with a bit extra. So what would they do with the extra ketairis that was left over each year? So says the Gemara, meaning you can't just use it for the next year. Why not? Because the ketairis is bought with the machzah shekel of the previous year, and therefore the kedusha is on the previous year. You can't save it for next year. So how do we get the rollover minutes? How do we get the ketairis to be used for the next year, to put the kedusha on the next year? So explains the Mishnah, you know what they would do? What they would do is as follows. They would separate the wages for the workers, and they would deconsecrate it on it for the workers. And then they would give the ketayres to the workers, bischarin, as their wages. Then they would buy it back with the new truma, with the new machzah shekel. Basically, I have extra ketayres. I have workers in the Beis Hamikdash I have to pay. So I pay the workers with the ketayres, because they're working for the Beis Hamikdash, allowed to accept something with kedusha. Or actually, more importantly, as we'll explain in the Gemara, really they deconsecrate the ketayres first. They put it onto money, and then they take the ketayres which now has no kedusha. I give it to the workers. Then I go to those workers and I take the new machzah shekels and I buy it back from them. So now the Beis Hamikdash effectively just acquired ketayres with the new machzah shekels for the new year. Depending if they have the new coins or not. So says the Gemara, let's explain this transfer like we just explained. How could he do what you just said? You can't transfer hektish to hektish. So what would you do? Explains the Gemara, which we sort of just explained. The Gemara is going to speak it out. Maybe they would take money. This money maybe has kedusha, maybe doesn't, and they'll be machalal the money on the binyan, onto the Beis Hamikdash itself. Now the money has no kedusha. Now that we have money without kedusha, as we move along to Yud Aleph Amud Beis, says the Gemara, maybe ketayros machalaleim. Now they'll do like we just said. They'll take the ketayros and take the kedusha from the ketayros and put on this money that has no kedusha. Then they'll take the ketayros which has no kedusha, give it to the workers, and then what do? Then they buy it back. Says the Gemara, at the end of this whole story, what are you left with? Left with money that received the kedusha from the ketayros. So what do you do with that cash? Ask the Gemara. He said, what do you do with it? Rabbi Omer Ani, I explain. We give it to the families of Garmu and Avtina. They were the ones. They would make the ketayros, and therefore they're allowed. That's what I explained when we said the Mishnah. They're allowed to accept money with kedusha. So we'll give them this money that has the kedusha of the ketayros on it. And they also made the lechem upon him. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. It only works if you have an account, if you have a debt, if you owe the families of Garmu and Avtina's money. So if you owe them money, now you could go and take this money with Kedusha and pay them. However, Rav Chia Bar Ba asks, remember that name, Rav Chia Bar Ba? What if you don't owe them money? Now what do? You got this money with Kedusha, what do you do? So Asa Rav Bibi B'Shem Rav Chia B'Shem Rav Yaisi, or actually the Girsa changes it to Rav Chia Bar Ba. Be careful. That was the same person who asked the question. Now he's answering it. But he answers, if you don't have an account to pay with those families of Garmun Avtinis, you use it to buy donations, to buy extra karbanos for the Mizbeach. Okay, very good. We'll do a recap in a moment, but the Gemara is bothered with what we just spoke out. Rav Ba Bar Kayin Ba Yikumi Rav Yosi Mechal V'Shitase to Rav Chia Bar Ba. He changed it to Rav Chia Bar Ba, and now Taman Tzrichale V'Kab Shitalei. What's going on? The same person who asked the question answers it. He asks, "What do we do if the families don't owe any money? So we have money with Kedusha," and then he answered. Excuse me, you don't ask questions and answer the same person. Explains the Gemara. It was pasha to him that you could use that money for the kids, for the offerings of Mizbeach. His question was, can you also use it to purchase the kelim, the vessels, the klisharis in the Beis HaMikdash? What was the question, which we'll see more about in a moment? The question was, is there inherent Kedusha Zagof on Ketayres, which then is transferred onto this money? And if there is Kedusha Zagof, then you could, use it to buy use it to buy the Klisharis or not. Before we continue, let's just get our bearings over here. Exactly what happened. We had a Mishnah. The Mishnah said we have Ketairis. We make 368 portions of Ketairis every year. So we have leftovers, only 354 days, plus the 3 portions the Kohen Gadol used to use on Yom Kippur. So we have extra portions left over. What do we do with that? What's the problem? Problem is you want to use it next year, but it has Kedusha for this year. Says the Gemara, you know what you do. Now we're going to say Lamaskana. You take this Ketairis. You take the Kedusha from the Ketairis and you put on money that does not have Kedusha because you took the money off that Kedusha you put on the building. So you have money without Kedusha, Ketairis with Kedusha, take the Kedusha from the Ketairis, throw it onto the money. Now you take this Ketairis and use it to pay the workers. Great. Then what do? Then we take the new coins of the Machzah Shekel and we buy back the Ketairis from that workers, and now we have Ketairis for the coming year with Kedusha of the coming year. Everything is great. Says the Gemara, but now you have money with Kedusha. What do you do with that money with Kedusha? You know what you do with it? You pay the families of Atinas and Garmu who made the Ketairis and the Lechem upon him if you have an account with them open. But if you don't have an account with them open, the same person that answers, the same person that asks, says what? You use it for the Kayets of the Mizbeach for the dessert, and as well, his question is bothering was, can you use it for the Klisharis? That last unanswered question was, what level of Kedusha is there to the Ketairis? Is it Kedusha's Hagof? Is there inherent Kedusha to the Ketairis, which then is transferred onto this money, which then is used to be paid, and therefore is going to be inherent Kedusha, and you could, use it to buy for the Klisharis, or is there not inherent Kedusha, therefore you can only use it for the kids Mizbeach? On that last point, says the Gemara, this Palgun Pitma Bechulin, they argued about the Pitma Bechulin when they made the Chulin. The Pitma Chulin Beketairis, it changes, Pitma Bechulin. If they made the Ketairis with Chulin, with vessels which were not Kaddish, you made the Ketairis, I am my house. I go and I have the recipe, I make Ketairis in my own cup. Is that a problem? Says the Gemara. So the fact that you're making Ketairis, if you make it for the Beis HaMikdash, that's fine. If you make it for your own private purpose, then you're Chayim Misa. But if you make it for the Beis HaMikdash, back Bismana Beis HaMikdash, that you knew the quantities, what's the halacha? Rav Yesi bar Rav Chanina Amar Psula, Rav Yeshua ben Levi Amar Ksheira. What's this machlokes? The machlokes is there inherent Kedusha onto the Ketairis? If you hold this inherent Kedusha on the Ketairis, then you're not allowed to make it in your own non-holy vessels. If you hold this not inherent Kedusha, then you're allowed to make it in your own vessels. I asked the Gemara, my time Rav Yossi bar Rebbe. What's the reason Rav Yossi bar Rebbe that says it is Pasol, Rabbi Chanina? Kadosh, he says in the Torah it should be holy. Shetiav Yasa be Kadosh, has to be created with holiness as inherent Kedusha. My time Rav Yossi ben Levi, Kadosh, Shetei Ba Mitrumas Alisha just means it comes from Kadosh money. So that is the Machlekes Usha to the Kedairis. On that, the Gemara continues and explains, Amar Rav Yossi bar Rabbon, Asya Rav Yossi ben Chanina, Kishmuel. The first opinion that held is Pasol, that held that is yes inherent Kedusha, goes like Shmuel. For Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Rav Yechlan, the Tanina we learned. Hamak Tishnachasav. Someone makes his properties holy. This is tomorrow's daf. You make your house holy, and inside your house you have items that could be used in the Beis HaMikdash. Do we take the item itself as have inherent kedusha and give it to the Beis HaMikdash, or do we sell it and give the value? So Rav Yechlan Amar Ketairis. If you have Ketairis in your house, then you let it go and give it straight to the Beis HaMikdash, what do we see? We see that there is inherent kedusha on the Ketayres, concurring with the opinion of Rav Yesi ber Rav Chanina. But the Gemara deflects and it says no raya. Rav Yoshia tipater ba'uman Mishel Beis Avtinos. No, we're talking about a house of a person of the Beis Avtinos she'yinotel scharu Ketayres, and that's the reason why he's Ketayres in his house. We go to the Beis HaMikdash. Not necessarily is there inherent kedusha. He happened to be a worker for the Beis HaMikdash, so there was kedusha on it. Says the Gemara, Rav Yesi ber Rav Chanina kishmuel. He holds like Shmuel that there's no inherent kedusha. They had to make the machteshes. They had to make it in. I'm sorry, I said the names wrong. Apologies. We're now in the opinion of Rav Yesi bar Chanina, who says that there is yes kedusha. He holds like Shmuel that he says because they made the klishares and it had to be in a holy vessel. Why? Because there was inherent kedusha onto it. Says the Gemara, Rav Yesi bar Rabban Amra. Rav Chuna, Kumi, Rav Yaisi, Davar Shekadish B'Klishares Nifte. Something which has kedusha in a klishares, it has inherent kedusha, you're allowed to redeem it. Amar lei, Veloy Dishmuli, and this is going to the opinion of Shmuel. The Shmuel Amar Kalu b'Meiser, this Balgin. No, meaning the Gemara just wanted to say, if you hold there's inherent kedusha, then would you be allowed to redeem it? Are you allowed to redeem items that have kedusha sagof? And that says the Gemara, no, it's no proof. What would the proof be? The proof would be from our Mishnah. Because in our Mishnah, what happened? What was the whole story that we started with the Ketayres? Is that you're redeeming the Ketayres and you're transferring the kedusha. So if you hold, so seemingly from the Mishnah, from the fact that you can redeem it, is a proof that there's no inherent kedusha. Because if there was inherent kedusha, how can you redeem it? On that, the Gemara retorts and says, no raya from the Mishnah. Amar lei v'loi. Because we're going with Shmuel that says, Kalu b'maiser, it's a special kula by any excess items automatically lose their kedusha and you can redeem them. So the fact you can redeem in our Mishnah is not a raya that is inherent kedusha. That is not inherent kedusha. This Palgan, there was a machlokes. I see here, Tamimim, if you have leftover karbanos, Shmuel Amar, niftik Tamimim, you allowed to redeem it. How you allowed to redeem it? It's a carbon. Shmuel holds when it's a leftover, you allowed to redeem it and you don't have to worry about it. Rav Yochanan Amar no, and if they kapsula mukdashim, you have to let it get a mum. Similarly, if you have he goats that are left over, I'll take the Shmuel. According to Shmuel, says you'll have to redeem it. Niftis lokoshkin chatos. This is a chatos. Of course you can redeem it. I'll take the Rav Yochanan Amar zira yiru. You cannot redeem it. Rather, you have to let it graze until it gets a mum. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yisrael mekaitze menas mizbeach. And you're allowed to use it for the kayitz of the mizbeach. And now we conclude, says the Gemara, v'kasha yishchata shekveva oila. What's going on over here? It end up being that a chatas is going to turn into an oila. How is that possible? Says the Gemara, it's not a problem. Rav Yesa sheniya he shein karbana sibur nikvayin ela b'shchita. Because when it comes to carbon sibur, when does it get its shame? When does it get its name? When does it become a chatas? Only once you shechted it. But if you never shechted it because it was leftovers, it never got that high level of kedusha, therefore it's not a problem transferring it from chatos to oila. Rav Chia Tanai Bezdin, he explains that this is all an inherent and an implicit Tanai, a stipulation that Bezdin speaks out on Meiser Shkira Oilais. They allowed to worship it as Oilais, not worship it. They allowed to sacrifice it as Oilais, and that is the end of the Gemara over here. That was the discussion. The final discussion was the machlokes, whether the Ketayres had inherent kedusha. We wanted to bring a riot from the Mishnah for the fact you can redeem it should show us it does not have inherent kedusha. The Gemara deflected that proof because we could go with the opinion of Shmuel, and Shmuel held that once something is leftovers, it loses its sanctity, or more importantly, you're allowed to redeem it, as the Gemara proved extensively. We'll pick up from Daf Yomi tomorrow.